get started. That attendance form, as always. Oh yeah, of course. No, it's good. Never mind. I just want to You're so sad. Alright, so today will be another demo / lecture type of situation. We'll just go over a quick overview on what we learned on Monday, and then Justin here will go over the demo that we're trying to get you guys to do. So while I'm doing the review, you might want to pull up Android Studio on your computer just so that it doesn't take so long to boot up. So first thing, the most important thing, one of the more important things that we learned on Monday was constraint view. It is the modern way to map all of your buttons and items on your screen and then constrain them in a way so that they look the way that you want them to look. And the way it works is you anchor the 4 sides of the item to different objects on the screen. So this could be other buttons, it could be the side of the screen, and you just want to constrain it in a way that it looks to what you envision it to look like. And it is the most efficient and the easiest layout to use by far. Next, there are inputs. So one of the key things that we are going to do for this demo is event listeners. We're actually going to be using event listeners. We're not just going to be putting them on a screen. And a key thing here is this is the syntax that we need to set up a listener. So there are many different listeners that you have to look through the API to get to understand. But here, this is a button listener. You set up a on-click listener, and that just listens for when you press a button, right? And all the code goes inside the on-click listener brackets. So basically, what this code does, again, is when you click a button, it executes whatever code goes inside, or like when it says your function goes here, it executes whatever is in here, right? Finally, we got just a review of how to actually read documentation, right? So here we have our documentation. It tells you the return stuff. It tells you like the parameters, like exactly what the type should be and what they actually represent. So here for RGB, the red is a float that represents how much red you want in the color. The green represents how much green, and then the blue represents how much blue you want. And it returns an int, which is the hexadecimal for the actual color. That's how you access it. For this, this is something you will use in one of your homeworks. Basically, instead of actually returning the hue, it stores all of the values within the array that you pass in. And so after you call this function, the array that you pass in will have the HSV values that are correlated to the color that you want, right? So this is what this function does. Here, you pass in the color, and it returns the 3 float array that contains the values for the HSV colors. Now, without further ado, we're going to get into the demo. This is generally what you're trying to make. So, you want to pull up where is it is. Where is it? This? Yeah, it'll be on there. This is everything code. Yeah, Alright, so the demo for today, we will be
making a sort of form submitter with various information that you may want to take from clients, for example. Actually, this works. There we go. So the end result that we're generally going to want is a sort of seek bar here that you can put in your age with. If you can notice, we will be changing the text view's color slightly by if your progress is higher, then you'll have a slightly higher, like, or reddish, more red tinted color for your text view. This is sort of to help you get started with homework 2, which does deal with color pretty extensively. And a little gender select form, and I am not a robot. Click that, and the submit button ungrays, and you can submit, and you'll say form submitted with a little toast. And hopefully you'd be able to use that information for whatever form submission that you'd actually use. Oh yeah, and that's a drop down. Yeah, right. Okay, so we're gonna let you guys get started on that for now. Just get the layout going in the layout editor. Make sure you build all of that. The views that you will need are called the spinner, which is this top area here. I will just show this very quickly. So the top area here is called a spinner. The seek bar is obviously the seek bar, and then you'll have a little text view. Above that, you'll have a radio group, each of which has a select amount of radio buttons, a checkbox, wherever that may be. Down. Okay, it must be down here. Yeah, checkbox, and then obviously a button. So get started on that. Get started making that layout, and if you have any questions, please let us know.
And every 10 or 20 minutes, we'll pop on the big screen and we'll actually show you how to implement it. So if you're really stuck, we'll basically show you how to do it and you can just follow along up here. You made an email class for that.
Yeah. Give some extra stuff.
That's why. It's excessive.
Yeah, I guess so.
Oh yeah, just a heads up for those people going into office hours. It has come to our attention that some of the rooms that we've booked don't actually exist, even though they've confirmed it for us. So unfortunately, if there's anyone trying to go to the room Rhodes 191, it does not exist. It is someone else's office. I don't know why they allowed us to book it. So we're trying to get offices for everyone, all the TAs that require offices for Rhodes 191. But for now, they will all be doing it via Zoom. So that's just a heads up, just in case you pull up the Rhodes and realize that the room doesn't actually exist for you guys to work with.
Probably just do the text. Hyperlink the text. All right, what's everybody's progress on the layout editor stuff? We good to go, or we need more time to make the layouts?
Say the drop down was called again.
Oh, the dropdown is called a spinner. I'm not sure if that's okay. If you search into the palette spinner, it will come up. Search spinner, and this is what you will need.
The spinner.
I'm not sure.
It's kind of whack.
Okay, this is generally what you should be looking for. Does anybody need extra time to create this in the layout editor? Oh yeah, what's up? What was that? Oh, the what exactly? Oh, the radio buttons. Should be in buttons. So yeah, radio group is in the buttons tab, and if you drag in a radio group into your layout, you can then drag a bunch of radio buttons into your radio group, like so, and it will add the radio button just like that. And you can change the text of your radio button to say, I don't know, if you created something, name it like that, just like that. Oh, constraining. Sure. So, right. So say I wanted to drag in a text view here. If I wanted to say constrain it to the left of my checkbox, and say like have it generally vertically aligned with the text box or the checkbox, then I would drag the bottom of the text to the bottom of the checkbox, top to the top of the checkbox, to generally like vertically align it, and then the right to the right of the box. And just like that, it's constrained to the left of the text box. Okay, is that good? Awesome.
How do you add trees to the spinner?
Oh, right. I'll go over that very quickly in a second. If everybody has the spinner up on their layout. Okay, awesome. So if you click on the spinner, you'll realize that it needs sort of entries resource. And so these are kind of arrays that you can create in your resources file, kind of like the strings.xml. So if we were to create one, you could just click on this top thing over here to create a array resource file. You can name it whatever. Let's say job underscore names. Hit OK. And that should have created it in my resources, although it's not showing up. There we go. So it'll create a new XML for you. And in order to actually declare an array of values that your spinner can populate with, you use the array, not capitalized, array thing, the array keyword, I suppose. And I believe you have to give it a name. And so let's just call it like job names. And each array needs an item that you would put in here and say like software developer, or you can name this whatever you want. And you can add a bunch of different items into this array. Software engineer, software whatever. And if you go into your activity now, this should be a declared array under the name job names. And so you can enter into the entries here, and it indeed does exist. So now I have software developer, and let's say I rebuild the app just to test it. I'm going to make this full screen. Let's see what I do. Then here is my emulated app, and now I have software developer, software whatever, and software engineer. Oh, right. So the XML file isn't going to automatically be there. You do have to create it. And so if you click on this little thingy here to like pick a resource for your entries, if you have your spinner selected, you'll see this attribute. If you then click on the button here, you'll be asked to pick a resource. And from here, you can actually just create one by clicking this plus button on in the top left. You can name it whatever, hit OK, and it'll create the XML file for you in the resources. And you could then add an array and various items to that array, like this.
The array XML is located with the rest of your XML that store values. So it would be in resources, and then values, and then you see how it's like next with colors, strings, and here you have my array, or what's it called? Job name.xml.
My array was the other one I'd created before this. But job names is the one I did just make. Okay, everybody good on that? Okay, so now we can start getting into the sort of brains of the app with our Kotlin. So now one of the first things we want is to sort of be able to actually read the values that these little entries are taking, to sort of hold on to them and be able to read and write to them. So whatever this is selected to, whatever our age is, maybe you can store that into an int somewhere and actually like have the progress bar show something. You can hold on to whatever gender the person selected and hold on to whether or not the checkbox is selected. And so the first thing, we'll actually just go to the seek bar right now. So of course we want a reference to our seek bar, and so we'll do our usual find view by ID. And I hope it's called r.id.seekbar. looks like it. And you would use whatever ID you put here or whatever ID it has. And so now we have a reference to our seek bar. And so if you wanted to add an on click or an on drag listener or whatever, you do seek bar dot on, or I think set on seek bar change listener. And again, I'll have to pull up the syntax for this because it is quite lengthy. It has to take in a object because there are again 3 sort of functions that could be listened for with a seek bar. And so we'll do object. This sort of just makes a particular instance of a implementation for a class with abstract functions to implement. You can do seek bar dot on seek bar change listener, which is, I believe, an interface. And so with the object keyword, we're sort of making one instantiation of the interface with various methods of that interface implemented. And so if you hover over this little thing, the little squiggly line here, you can automatically implement all the members from with Android Studio. It'll automatically throw them all in. The ones that we're really interested in is the progress bar chain. We don't really care about if the person selects it, unselects it. We really care about if the bar is dragged. For this, we should just be able to leave that empty if I believe correctly. I don't think you actually have to return anything for those. Yeah, you don't because there's no return value. That should just be good, leaving it like that. And so in order to listen for, say, a value that we want for the age, let's make a variable here for storing the age of our user. And so let's say, or it has to be var, right, because we're changing it all the time. Var age of int, and we'll just set it to like 0 initially, since that's what it is on their app here by default. And so whenever our progress bar changes, we want to update this age field with the actual age that the user has selected with the seek bar. And so we can say age equals p1, and it's just that simple. Age will automatically populate with whatever p1 is, which is the progress of the progress bar at that point in the dragging. And so I guess if we wanted to test this really quickly, we could say log.d, I'll import that with whatever tag, let's just say like seek bar debug, and actually print, say, age is, and then age. And now if we at least go into our log cat, we should be able to see a seek bar debug pop up whenever I change the value of this guy. And as you can see, it's changing correctly with the age. Oh, I believe this is 1 to 120 also. Oops, I clicked on that thing. This is going from 1 to 120, and I struggled to find this last time. Let me see if I can find it this time. Oh yeah, so seek bars have a maximum attribute. So if you want to say set a maximum like limit for your progress bar, you can change this from say 120 to 360. If I quickly rebuild the app, then I could take in somebody whose name is whose age is 360. If I open my logcat here, you'll be able to see that. Yeah, age is 360. And now obviously we want this text view up here to actually populate with the age of our user that they've selected, because right now it's kind of ambiguous what any of these values mean. And so we can do that just by getting again a reference to our text view. So let's say this is called seek bar label, and we can get it by find view by ID once more. And it is text view. Import that just like that. And now to get our text view ID, let's see what that happens to be. Obviously, you'd probably want to name this a good ID. So instead of my text, let's say seek bar label for our ID. Refactor that, sure. And now it should pop up here. Awesome, and this is probably just a build error. Now we have a reference to our seek bar label, and so pretty much we would just set it to whatever we want whenever the seek bar is dragged, whenever the age is changed. And so what it looks like right now is age 0, and so it's kind of follow that convention. We could say age, and then $ age to take in the age. It's just a shorthand for concatenation. Oh, I meant .text, just like that. And that will take in the age, and it should replace the text view with the correct age. So let's test that really quickly. We drag it around, we can say age up to 360, awesome, and it's changing whenever the seek bar is dragged. And of course, nobody's really going to live to 120, so we should probably change that limit. So I'm going to put that back again to, say, 120. Awesome. Okay, so now let's say the next thing we want to implement is our radio buttons, right? So let's get a reference to our radio buttons and then make a listener for that. So, well, first of all, you have to get a reference to the radio group, and the group itself has its listener, in which if you click any of the buttons in the radio group, then the entire radio group will sort of respond and listen to that input. So we can get a reference to our radio group, find view by ID with our radio group. Import that, and our.id.probably radio group, right? So now we have a reference to our radio group, and so let's add a listener. Radio group dot add, or not set, or not add, but it is set on checked change listener. That's what it's called, since you're technically like checking things in the radio group. And so if I do that, I'm pretty sure this one just takes in a function, if I'm not mistaken. And so this takes in two parameters. One of them is like the radio group itself, and the other is an int corresponding to the sort of index for which one is selected. So let's say this one would be probably 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And so the way you can sort of take in those arguments with an anonymous function like this is just kind of by writing them here. And so you could say view, comma, ID, and then you'd pass them in with this arrow here as sort of a shorthand for taking these two parameters with this anonymous function and then passing them in. And so let's just see what the IDs happen to be. Let's call this radio group debug, and just print id.constrain. Because sometimes the IDs on these things get kind of crazy. Let's see, radio group debug, that should pop up when I click any of these. And so 1, 2, 3, and that's definitely not 4. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but yeah, the numbers here can get kind of crazy sometimes. And so obviously we want to sort of hold on to this value, say have a variable for whatever the person has selected so that I can use it later on. And so one way you could do this is with a enum class. Since we only have 4 possible selections here, we could sort of enumerate this instead of saying, oh, I'm going to just treat 1 as male or 2 as female, 3 as other, and then whatever that number is, I prefer not to say. I could actually sort of make this more intuitive by making an enum class. And so you can just say enum class, and we're going to have a class for gender. And pretty much for enums, if you're not familiar, you just kind of enumerate the possibilities for a value of type gender. And so these would be male, the general conventions have them all uppercase, female, other, and say prefer not to say. Or we'll just say prefer not. And now we have an enum class gender, and if I say like write any of these values just as male, it should be able to be used, or say gender.male. Then I should be able to use that pretty much anywhere here. And so now I can make a variable here for like a select gender, and we'll make that of type gender, and we'll say default. Maybe we can make a none here for like not selected currently, and have that as our default. All right, that's the gender. Okay, not that one. Gender dot none. And just like that, we have a variable now that we can change whenever our gender is selected. And so here, we saw before that male, female, other, and prefer not to say are these four values. And so one way you could do it is just with like some if statements, like, oh, if my ID is 1, then do this. If my ID is 2, then do female, 3, other. A sort of different way to do this is with a when statement. This is basically just a switch case, pretty much just a switch case statement, and it's kind of just a glorified bunch of ifs. But it is convenient. And so the way that this works is you say when, you take in a value, and then you sort of match it with certain possible values. And so you could say when ID is 1, then I'm going to do something. And what that thing would be is, say, set gender equal to male, gender.male. And just like that, if ID is 1, then it'll go here, and then set it to gender.male. If I do 2, then I'd want it to set gender equals gender dot female. Same thing for 3, but for other. And for 4, or not 4, it's whatever this monstrosity is. We'll just say else. Gender equals gender dot prefer not. I honestly couldn't tell you why it does that. Maybe it's something with like the button in like a button attribute. I'm honestly not sure because it doesn't show up it doesn't show up immediately. But regardless, it's just a number that we can check for. And so for this, we can now debug this very quickly to say gender.toString and see if it's actually selecting the correct one. Let's see, this is radio group debug. And so if I click on male, it'll print male, print female, other, and prefer not. Awesome. Okay, now that functionality is pretty much good. Whenever we click on a button in the radio group, it'll populate the gender variable with the correct gender. And so we only have a few more things to implement here. So we'll go on to the spinner next. And so what is the actual syntax for this? Okay, so spinners are sort of similar to the seekbar change listener in that they have a few different ways you could say track for input. So I could want, as a developer, to say, okay, whenever my user clicks on this, I want to take an input, or whenever they click on this, it would take an input, or if I ever say click on this again to go down, that's another input. So these are like 3 different inputs or so that do require a more complicated listener in order to take in all the possible inputs, just like seekbar here with progress change, starting, and stopping touch. And so for the spinner, well, first of all, let's get a reference to the spinner, like always. By ID, r.id.myspinner. Is it called myspinner? Yes, it is myspinner. Not your spinner, it's my spinner. And then now I can add a, or did I call it spinner? I did, didn't I? Okay, spinner dot, I think this one I can say either dot set on item click listener, or just what also works is dot item click listener, and then I can just set this equal to something. And so either way would work. And so sure, I'll just use this syntax for now. Again, we need to make an object for the sort of complicated 3 sets or multiple functions that we'll have to track input for. And so this one is called adapter view dot. I'll have to import that. The item, I believe it's selected listener. And so now if I sort of try to instantiate this, again, it'll say that I haven't implemented all of the interfaces that I need. So if I then click on all of those, then I will have implemented them, which is a very nice way for Android Studio to save us some time. And so the way, or the one that we actually care about is item selected, I believe, and that will sort of ask, oh, why is it doing this? I do not want that. Not sure exactly why it was asking for that. Well, I guess it wasn't doing any harm, so whatever, I'll keep it there. I'm not exactly sure why that's happening, and I shouldn't need that, but regardless. So now I can just implement my onItem selected. And so this will fire whenever I say select a different attribute of this of the spinner right here. So whenever I would say select software, whatever, it would pass that as a as an int here. And so this is a reference to the view itself. Again, I'm not sure why they even do that. Another reference to the view itself, and an int for the index. And so let's see what each of these print for the index. And so let's say spinner debug for p2 or .toString. See very quickly again with our logcat what each of these is printing. Oh, we have an error. Okay. What exactly is going on? That I'm click listener cannot be used with a spinner. Interesting. Let's just use instead set on item. Oh, I think I know why. Was I using an item click listener? I believe it has to be a selected listener. That must have been it. Which is why it was trying to get me to do this as well. Yeah, okay, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, so on item selected listener, not clicked. Should be selected. That was my mistake. So now everything works as intended. That other function is not popping up. That makes a lot more sense. So now we have an on item selected listener, and this is the actual proper one for a spinner. So now hopefully we'll not get an error. And so now we want to see what our spinner debug is doing. And whenever we say select software developer, or say select another one, whatever, it'll do 1, engineer, it'll do 2, developer, 0. Awesome. Okay, so now we know what each index corresponds to, and so we can do a sort of when statement again. So we want to match on the P2. And so whenever it's 0, we want to have software developer, 1 is whatever, and 2 is engineer. And so we can make another enum class for this. Of course, you could just say, oh, I'm going to treat 0 as developer, 1 as whatever, and 2 as engineer. But a more sort of concrete way to do it is with an enum class. So we can say enum class job, or let's just say dev, engineer, and whatever. And so now we have this enum class, and let's make a variable for it to actually store the value. So let's say selected job, type job, equals the default, I guess we can, or the default is, if you see here, if I were to reload the app, it is actually developer, and so it would make sense to have job.dev here as our default value for the selected job. As you can see, the software developer is the default selected one, since it is the first in our array here to show up. Okay, now, so this should, or we haven't actually told it to set it into the variable, so let's do that. So whenever p2 is 0, we want it to say set my variable to, what is it, developer, right, job.dev. If it's 1, then I'll want to do, or whatever I believe it is. And then 2 is job.engineer. Engineer. Awesome. Okay, so you don't have to actually make this exhaustive, I don't believe, but if we wanted to say have some other values, we could say else and say select job equals job.dev, let's say. Okay, and assign another one. Interesting. Well, thank you, Android Studio, for pointing that out. Apparently, you can do that, which makes sense. Obviously, you can pull it out and then match on just this value, and then whatever this when statement will evaluate to would be put into selected job. Saves some lines of code, I suppose. Okay, and now select a job. If we wanted to again debug it very quickly, we could say log.d with job debug, say, with our selected job. .toString. Say job debug, and you can see it already has printed dev since that's what's initially selected. Whatever for whatever, and engineer for engineer. Awesome. So now our selected job is actually being set to the correct values. Okay, now let's finally do our checkbox and have this sort of enable the button if all the conditions are correct. And so not sure how I did that, for our checkbox, let's again get our reference. For a checkbox, our.id.probably checkbox. So now we have a reference to our checkbox, and we can add a listener once more. And so I believe this is a check change listener. And this one's a little bit more simple. It just takes in a function, and it seems Android Studio has given me a sort of autocomplete with the 2 variables that I need. And so B is the Boolean for if it's checked or not. And this other one is, well, it's another reference to the view. Again, not sure why they even pass that in. I'm just going to call it underscore so I know not to use it. So my Boolean here is what I actually care about. And so let's have a variable here Not sure what happened there. Okay, something's going out there. Try not to get distracted by that. So we have a variable for if it's checked or not is checked. That is extremely distracting. And let's have this equal to false initially, since of course this is false on startup. We don't. We also don't have to explicitly put the type again. I could, but we don't have to, since Kotlin is smart enough to know that this is of type Boolean, and I could have done this for these other ones as well to make my code a little bit more concise, but it doesn't really matter. And so whenever the checkbox is changed, I want to put this new is checked, or I want to put if it's checked into the variable is checked. And of course, let's just quickly debug that. Checked with is checked. To string. See if that works very quickly. So checked, and say we spam this, then it'll say true, false, true, false, true, true, false, true, false. Awesome. Now our is checked should be being set to the correct stuff. And so let's say whenever our checkbox is selected, we want to enable or disable the button from being pressed. Currently, it is actually disabled, and if I go to my button and look at the attributes, there should be a sort of enabled button. Let me see if the attributes enabled, and that is currently set to false. If I were to set it to true, then it'd be purple, like always. And if I were to set it to false again, then it's grayed out and you can't click it. But let's say for a checkbox, if everything's right, then we want to enable the button to be able to be pressed. And so the conditions for that are, well, first I need to not be a robot, and I need to have a proper gender selected. So gender is not equal to gender.none. Then if these conditions are met, I want to enable my button. So again, have to get a reference to that. Do that very quickly. Find ID with my button, r.id.button. And with this button, I can enable it. So button.enabled is enabled equals true. And then, well, I guess that's sufficient. I guess else I'd want to set it to false, right? And obviously this is just shorthand for saying button.is enabled is equal to if those Boolean statements are true. So let's fire that up. And so if I select a proper gender and check the box, then the checkbox will actually be true or false. One thing is that I don't actually think I can unselect this, and so this should be fine, even though I'm not actually checking for this. But one thing that might be wrong is if, say, I check this and then go to click on my radio buttons, because the radio button isn't actually checking for this, I can no longer select it, and I'd have to, say, uncheck it and then recheck it again. So let me just copy this sort of logic over to the radio buttons. And now that bug should be fixed. Okay, so if I were to select this and then select one of these, then it still enables. Awesome. Okay, and the last thing we want to do is to be able to actually, like, say, submit the form. And so you guys are familiar with this already. For buttons, you can do set on click listener and pass in a function. This function can just be whatever code. And so let's say we want to make a toast for if our text has been, or if our form has been submitted correctly. And so for context, again, pass in this. Don't worry about context. We'll get that in a future lecture. And we want to pass in the actual text, which is, say, form submitted for, and then whatever job they have. So let's say job, select a job, toString. It might look a little weird because it's going to be all caps, but you get the point. Should get at least mostly the point across. This might do the $sign thing. Yeah, okay, makes sense. And we need to actually show, or is this? Oh yeah, and for the amount, for the duration that the toast is going to be shown, this can be like long, length.long, and we are going to show the show the toast. Okay, awesome. So now, whenever the button's pressed, we should have a form submitted thing for our user to show them that whatever has been sent in. So if we select stop or whatever, submit, form submitted for whatever. And if we wanted to quickly check what all the other values are. We can say like submit debug, and then try to see if all of our values are correct. So we can say like age is, and then our age. Go to the next line, say, what's the next thing to select a job? Well, we already tested that. Our gender is our gender. And any other things? Well, we know that they have to not be a robot, right? And so if we just test this for submit debug, yeah, that should be fine. And say select age 43, gender male, I'm not a robot. Then you can see our age is 43 and our gender is male, just like we selected. So these values are actually holding true. And so if you were actually making a sort of form submission, you would be able to sort of actually use these values to submit to whatever backend that you are operating with. And so one last little thing that we have yet to implement that I will go through very quickly here is the seek bar changing color, as you saw before. And this will help you with your homework too, which does dive pretty deep into changing colors based off of seek bars. And so seek bars can actually, well, text is the thing that we actually want to change, the color of the text. And so you can change this by saying text wherever it is. I actually don't have a reference to it. Let me get that. Oh, wait, no, I do. Seek bar label, right? And so seek bar label, I can say set the text color of it by doing set text color. And this will take in a color as an int. And like we said, technically, if I were to like throw in some random int here, it would technically work. But the way that these are generally written is with a hexadecimal, with the alpha being first, R, G, and B. So this would be, for example, white, I believe. And well, I most likely didn't write that correctly, but that's not the point. You shouldn't be writing those like that anyways. What we actually want to do is say change the color of this depending on what this value is. And so if you read the documentation for color, you'd be able to say, well, I know a function for that. It's called .rgb. And so RGB takes in an int, just like a regular int, not a color int, for your red between 0 and 255. Does that for green and blue as well. And so if we wanted to, say, scale from about 0 to 255, we could say just P1 times about 2. This will give us, since our P1 is from 0 to 120, this will give us 0 to 240 as our possible options for our red. And then you can set just like 0 for our other greens and blues. And so this will give us the corresponding color for that age that we have submitted. And so now if we drag it, you can see our color is actually changing, like so. And so that brings us right to the end of lecture, or to the end of discussion, just on time once more. So thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, please stick around. But just a quick reminder that your homework 2 is due next Sunday. We will have a homework project due every week. This one's a little bit more involved than the previous one, which is more of just a sort of introduction to the class in Android Studio. So we encourage you guys to look at it soon, or look at it early, because it is more of like an actual project this time around. But we hope you find it interesting, and well, thank you for coming to demo today. Have a good night, everyone. Oh yeah, of course, this demo code will be posted online, and the lecture video that I did not mess up this time. It is still recording. Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Of course.
Thank you for coming.